Shalom and welcome. It has been 300 years since we exited the Ark. My children have had children, their children have had children, and their children, and we are well on the way to obeying Yahweh's command to refill the earth.
This mic's not on.
But I know you have not come today to reminisce. You are facing a challenge, a risk, and you are afraid. For you do not know how things will turn out. You do not know if Yahweh will be with you or not. I understand those fears. It is so hard to do what we must when we do not know how things will turn out. I suppose that is why my wife and I waited so long to start our families. You see, in my day, people started their families when they were still quite young. 75, 80, 85 years young. I was nearly 500 years old when we began our family. My wife and I just could not conceive of bringing innocent life into such a wicked and corrupt world. Violence, bloodshed, every thought of every individual was turned toward evil. But then, we found hope. My father, Lamech, and my grandfather, Methuselah, were godly men, and they began to speak the word of the Lord to our world. And they spoke with such authority, such power of Yahweh. The Lord will not always strive with people, they cried. The life of man will be 120 years, they cried. And there was such power in their words that my wife and I thought, surely the world will turn. The world will change and come back to Yahweh. And so, over the period of about 20 years, we had 3 fine, strapping young boys, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. We knew the world would be a better place. We were wrong. My youngest, Japheth, was still a boy when I turned 500 years old. And my wife and sons threw such a feast for me. And as we celebrated and made merry, I was so thankful that my wife and I had stepped out, took the risk, and brought those boys into the world. It was that night, after the feast, that Yahweh spoke to me. And what he said made these old knees weak. The end of all flesh has come before me. The world was so wicked, so broken. Yahweh said he was going to wash it clean with a flood, wash away every plant, animal, and person off the face of the earth. I nearly fainted at his words. And then he said, "You will build an ark." And what an ark? What a box or boat. It was to be 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 4.5 stories tall. It was to have a large door in the side of it that served both as door and ramp. 3 floors, pens, cages. We were to enter the ark and take with us some of every animal off the face of the earth. After finishing those words, Yahweh left. The next morning, I told my family what Yahweh had said, and my words were greeted with stunned silence. And then everyone started speaking at once. "Father, are you sure it was Yahweh? Father, where would we get the wood to build such a boat? Father, how could there be enough water to raise such a boat, let alone flood the earth? Father, how will we convince the animals to come on board the ark with us? Father, what will the neighbors say?" I said, "I don't know." They were simply asking the questions that had robbed me of a night's sleep that night before. But then I said, "Our forefathers have told us the stories of how Yahweh created everything out of nothing, and how Yahweh Elohim then separated the waters of chaos that he had created above and below, and how he suspended the dry ground and the seas and the rivers in between." And I said, I suppose if Yahweh could separate the waters of chaos out, he could allow them to come crashing back in. And I said, "I don't know how we will convince the animals to come on the ark. I don't know what our neighbors will say. But this I do know. Throughout my 500 years, I have walked with Yahweh, and he has walked with me. He has walked with our fathers, our forefathers, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech. He has always been with us. He will be with us now." I said, "I am going to build an ark. Who's with me?" And of course, they all were. Even my father and grandfather. We were a fairly wealthy family back then, but it took everything we had to build that ark. We began to sell off pieces of property to ship in the wood. We finally sold our ancestral home and moved into the ark to live for 100 years. We labored. Our days were full of hammers and pegs and saws and planers and bits and braces and wood chips and calluses. My boys grew tall and strong in the labor, and by they each took a wife. Even in that evil, corrupt world, Yahweh found 3 fine young women to be wives for my sons. to join our family, and to join our God. As the ark built, as it grew, the curiosity of our neighbors grew as well, and they came in 1s and 2s and 20s and 30s to see what we were building and to ask, why are you building such a big boat so far from any sea? What are you crazy people doing? My father, Lamech, and my grandfather, Methuselah, and I took turns sharing the word of Yahweh. The time is short, we said. We have less than 100 years, we said. Turn from your evil ways. Turn back to Yahweh and join us on the ark. Many came, many heard. Most laughed, and all left. None joined. For 100 years we labored, and for 100 years Yahweh was silent, did not speak, nary a word. Doubts, fears. For 100 years of silence we labored. And I confess through all that time, I wondered, did I hear Yahweh right? When we sold our home, did I hear Yahweh right? When we built and there was no rain, did I hear Yahweh right? For 100 years. But then one day, Yahweh spoke again. Enter the ark, he said. You, your wife, your sons' wives, and take some of all of the animals of the earth with you, and thus you will preserve life upon the earth. I told my family the day had come, and we looked at each other, for once again we faced the question for which we had no answer. How will we convince the animals to join us on the ark? As we stood there looking at each other, suddenly we heard a rumble like distant thunder. We looked up, and on the horizon was this cloud of dust. In short order, we discovered the source. The animals were coming. From everywhere, coming, marching in rows like ants to a picnic. They came down the way to the ark. The clean animals in groups of 7. The unclean animals in groups of 2. They came down the way, they came up the ramp, and we set about securing them in the pens and the cages and the places we had prepared. For 7 days they came, and for 7 days we secured them, established them, got the feeding patterns going. And then there was the other question we had never answered. How would we close the door? Would some of us have to stay outside, push it to, smear it with pitch? How would we get back in? Well, as we were securing the last of the animals, suddenly we heard a groaning, wood hinges turning in their housing. Shem cried, "Father! The door is shutting of its own!" And in short order, we heard the sound of pitch being brushed back and forth across the door, filling in the cracks. And we knew Yahweh was with us. I thought of my father, Lamech, who had helped with the work, who had encouraged us, who had spoken out to the world, but who had died 10 years before. And dear old Methuselah, he was so sure he would live to enter the ark. But he died as we were putting the finishing touches on the roof. Without their support, their example, their witness to Yahweh's glory, my family and I might well not have been on the ark when the skies broke open. And on that seventh day, as we were finishing the pitch on the walls of the door, the sky broke. It rained like we had never seen rain. At the same time, water began to geyser up from the ground, spouting forth like vicious fountains. By the next day, people had gathered outside of the ark, banging on the side of the ark, begging us to open the door. I remembered Yahweh. People have, the life of man shall be 120 years. Yahweh will not always strive with me. The time to turn had passed. If I live to be another 900 years, I shall never forget the sound of their cries as they were drowned out by the rising waters. For 40 days, 40 nights, it rained. And water began to lift the ark. After 40 days, the rain stopped, and for 150 days, the ark sailed here and there. As far as the eye could see, nothing but water. No treetops, no mountaintops, no life except in the seas. 150 days. But then, the waters began to recede. Within 30 days, we could see the mountaintops reaching up out of the waves. Shortly thereafter, the ark came to land on a ridge of a mountain range. Within 60 days, the water was gone. But it took 30 more days for the mud to harden into clay. In that time, I was sending out birds to see what they might find. And in the beginning, they went out and they came back with nothing. And then they went out and they came back with leaves and branches. And then they went out and they did not come back at all. Finally, my sons and I broke open the door, the ramp fell, we released the animals, they could not wait to get off the ark. My family and I, however, were not in such a rush. The world we had known was gone. What would we find? We had tools, and we had seed. We were prepared to begin anew, but a strange, new world. And we were also afraid that if we left the ark, that somehow, some way, we would displease Yahweh. You may remember the problem I had with grapes and drinking too much? What if we failed Yahweh and He decided again to destroy the world, this time with us in it? And then Yahweh spoke. I had taken wood from the ark, built an altar, offered on the altar sacrifices of some of the clean animals to say thank you, to get our sins forgiven. And Yahweh said, summer and winter, seed time and harvest, day and night shall not cease from the earth. Never again will I destroy the earth with a flood. And He said, when you see the rains and your fear rises, look in the sky. For as a warrior who comes home from battle hangs his war bow on the wall, Yahweh said, I will hang my war bow in the sky to remind you that I will never again make war upon the earth with a flood. So we left the ark and we started over. And you're thinking, great-great-grandfather, what is your point? You are facing this challenge. Oh, I've heard. I know. It is such a risk. For 900 years, I have walked with Yahweh. And I've learned. Yahweh walks with those who walk with Him. Remember my great-grandfather Enoch. Enoch walked with Elohim. And then Enoch was not. For Elohim took him home without death. Face your challenge. Walk with Yahweh and my children. Yahweh will walk with you. Let us pray. Yahweh, Elohim, who saved my family and life from a flood. Yahweh Elohim, who has walked with those who seek Him. We give you praise. And I ask you, Yahweh, to be with my children. Help them to walk with you. When they fail, help them to turn back to you. And give them strength to face their fears. For Yahweh, with Elohim, no risk is too great. Amen. Well, none of us have been where Noah was. But if you've spent any time with Yahweh, with the Lord, He's sent you places you'd rather not go. He's asked you to do things you'd rather not do. There was a church leader who was on a trip going where God had sent her. Her carriage got stuck in the mud. She got out. There was no one to help. She looked up and said, if this is the way you treat those who walk with you, no wonder you don't have many friends. Sometimes it feels that way. Sometimes because we are frail, fallen creatures of dust, who live under the constraints of time, Yahweh's silence, His apparent absence, gives birth to fear. don't they? We need to remember, He promises to go with those who go with Him. So don't let your fear stop you from doing what He's called you to do, from being what He's called you. And it seemed appropriate, given the theme, that we sing a great song about not giving in to fear. Whom shall I fear? Why don't you stand with